Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Tech Talk, REGEX Expressions in Cisco Expressway. I'm Maren Mahoney, your host. Good morning. This course came out of questions I would get in the CLECI course. Actually, let me do the agenda thing first here. Sorry. Right. I'm going to talk a little bit about where this Tech Talk came from and all that. And then we're going to start looking at expressions. I'm going to start with the basic expressions, just the individual elements. How do I ask for repeated elements? And then some additional expressions that allow me to do groupings and things. I will talk about that one piece at a time. And then lookaheads and lookbehinds, which are way more complex than people give them credit for. If you're confused by them, you're not alone. I'll do what I can to make them as clear as I can. And then we'll end with showing some practical examples, especially with regards to what the replace strings might look like. If you are familiar with Expressway operations, you know it's not just enough to do matches. I mean, that's the search rules, matches. But then for transforms and also for regex expressions like on zones, how do I go about doing the replace strings? How do I do the modifications using these regex expressions? This here is particularly focused on the expressions themselves, but we'll take a little bit of look at the replace strings. So as I mentioned, this particular Tech Talk came out of questions I get often in the CLECI course. That's this guy right here, Cloud and Edge. This is one of the CCNP collaboration specialization courses and exams. You spend 4 days on Expressway. It's actually a very cool course. And then 1 day on integrating WebEx with CUCM via the Expressway pair. For coming to this Tech Talk, we are offering a promotion. If you're interested in taking CLECI, and it'll be me teaching it in March and again in June, 20% off, promo code 20CLECI. Yay. Also, they want me to talk about this real quick. We also do have a video library. This particular Tech Talk that I'm doing right now, I believe is going to be made available on our website, but I'm going to be recording later on another Tech Talk where I'm going to talk about troubleshooting, like how do I use the troubleshooting tools built into Expressway to help me make sure that my regex expressions are doing what I'm expecting them to do, right? Matching the right things, replacing the right things. I'm going to do a troubleshooting Tech Talk, and that's going to be part of our video library available next on demand. You get a year's subscription. They're offering a discount again for having attended this Tech Talk. But like we recorded all of our courses, and there's lab walkthroughs, and there's Tech Talks like this on all sorts of varieties of subjects. And you get access, as I understand it, to all of the disciplines, not just collaboration. Learning plans, to help you. Oh, I need to learn about, bulk administration tool. Well, watch this video, go read this document. Here's the next thing, kind of. So it's really cool. Anyway, we get a lot of folks who renew their subscriptions, so people are seeing value. All right, all of that. One last thing before we get started, there is a Q&A panel. If you have any questions as we go along, please put it into Q&A. I will answer questions as I see them, but I'm also going to have an open Q&A at the end for anybody who else has additional questions. So here we go. Okay, so regex expressions. Regex stands for regular expression. It is a programming language. This is not just for Cisco land or Tandberg VCS land. This is also, if you do any HTML coding, regex expressions are used to do call outs to a variety of things. And that actually impacts the way we view regex. And I'll talk about it, but like there's some subtle differences between regex expressions in iOS and iOS XE, like if you're doing voice translation profiles or SIP profiles, and when you're doing regex expressions in VCS, because, hey, that just keeps us all employed, right? But it also means because there's a lot of flexibility, it's programming. If you know any programmers, you know that there's more than one way to do things oftentimes. And that's not any different really with regex as well. And we'll see a couple of examples of that as we go through. So again, let's start with some basic expressions. The most simple one, of course, is a dot, any single character. Alphanumeric, also symbols. A dot could be a @ sign. A dot could be a pound sign. It can be anything. So that the most flexibility. /D. When you're looking at regex expressions, if you see /D, that is indicating specifically a digit and not an alpha character of any kind. Now, the backslash before the D, we will talk about that here shortly, because that's an important component of that. Effectively, at least in the case of this guy, what's the difference between a D like in dog and a /D like in digit? It's the slash. And we'll talk about why that is here in just a second. Just like in CUCM, if you see square brackets, we're talking about one character, something in this list. Now I'm making a specific list here. It can be an alpha character inside the list. It could be a numeric character inside the list. Again, could be a diacritical mark like an ampersand or whatever inside. So anything inside the brackets. If it's listed inside the brackets, it is it's a go, right? And that's slightly different than if I put a dash in there between similar characters. Now I could, in the case of the 0 through 9, I could say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The dash in between the same characters means all of them. Now that's a little different, by the way, and just where's my mouse? There we are. Sorry, my mouse was on the other screen. Stop it. Why is this not letting me do my thing here? Let me try that. There we go. Okay. So if I have a square brackets, right, and I do 0 through 9, that's 0 through 9. But if I did, let's say 0 and then a dash and then A, that's a little different. 0-A, those are different characters, the 0 and the A. And therefore, the dash at that point actually means a dash. Like if you think about an email address, I might have a dash between two components inside an email address, right? This would be a list. This is a range. This would be a list, a 0, a dash, or an A. So think about that when you see a dash inside of brackets. Are they indicating a dash character or are they indicating a range? If you see a caret inside of brackets, and again, this is exactly the same as it is in CUCM, we're talking about not. Anything in this list, and you could do a range. I could do, I could do a square brackets, right, with hat A-C, right? And that would be the same as this. So these are the easy ones, like I said. Now, there are square brackets. We are also going to see in just a little while the curly Q brackets. And then there's parentheses. And these are 3 different things used for 3 different purposes. Brackets. Inside the brackets, again, a range or a list, a single character. The curly Q brackets, as we will see in a moment, are arguments about a previous variable. And just hold on to that thought. Don't ask me about that yet. I'll talk about that in a second. Parentheses indicate a grouping. If I want to group either a set of characters or a set of variables and be able to call back to them, that's when I'm going to create a group. For anybody who is familiar with writing voice translation rules as part of a voice translation profiles, it's exactly the same kind of concept. And again, I'm going to be giving an example of this, so hold on to that thought. And then the backslash changes the meaning. Let's talk about the backslash. So here's the deal. CUCM, and more importantly, Cisco iOS, came from Cisco land. The expressways came out of Tandberg, which, Cisco bought Tandberg like 15 years ago or so. And so 2 different companies, 2 different systems. Cisco and formerly Tandberg viewed these characters differently. And here is the difference. If I'm programming a web page, And I need to put, let's say, a parenthesis. You know, parenthesis again is a perfect example of this. If I'm going to put a parenthesis on a web page of some kind, is this going to indicate the first part of some kind of a grouping? Or do I actually want to type out a parenthesis on the screen? Is it a printable character or a non-printable character? This is where this came from, the original coding, right? Because we're talking about a programming language. So this means that if we think about it on a web page, if I have the parenthesis, that is a programming thing, right? I'm creating a grouping. So on a web page, if I want to make a parenthesis a printable character, I want to change its behavior. It's currently a programming thing saying I'm starting a grouping, but I want to change it and say, no, 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 no. I actually want you to type a parenthesis on the screen. I would put a backslash in front of it. So same thing here. Do I want D in dog, like in a domain name? Or do I want that D to be a variable, meaning a digit? A D is a printable character and it stays a printable character. If I want to change it into a variable, meaning digit, that's when I put the slash in front of it. I'm altering its meaning. And rather, you know, is it a printable D or is it a variable? A dot, on the other hand, is in VCS is exactly the opposite. A dot in VCS is a variable by definition. It is a character. Now, if I want to change that into, hey, a dot, and think about a domain name, right? Like bob.com. All right, let me type bob.com. Right? This dot here, is this a variable or is this supposed to be a dot? And, you know, you and I can look at this and say, yes, that's supposed to be a dot here. But what if I put this into VCS? VCS is going to see that as a variable. So Bobacom, B-O-B-A-C-O-M, would be a match. In order to say to VCS, no, 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 don't view this as a variable, view this as a character. Again, I put the backslash in front of it, right? And this is why you see the weird slashes in the strange places. Now, the thing is, and you know, I indicated this on an earlier screen, like the way Cisco views these characters and the way VCS views these characters is a little different. And that's because Cisco predated Tandberg. When Cisco was building iOS, they were using the straight up code like you would in HTML because they understood that HTML was going to be kind of a thing, right? When the Tandberg people were building their VCSs, they're like, yeah, I'm never going to have a parenthesis in anything I'm doing that's not going to be a grouping. So in iOS, if I'm going to put a parenthesis and say I need it to be a grouping, you have to put the slash in, because it makes the distinction between is this a printable character or not. In VCS, you don't. And there are a few other examples like that. So the takeaway I want you to have for this is the backslash is used to alter the meaning of a character. If it is a printable character, turn it into a variable, or if it's a variable, turn it into a printable character. And the other thing I want you to take away from this is that the syntax, because of this thing, is slightly different in iOS, iOS XE, and in the Expressways, the VCSs. And that's, again, just because they grew up under different, you know, companies. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples of basic expressions. 4 dots, 4 character string. I think that's pretty straightforward. Let me move this over here. Here we go. So a 4 character string, I don't think that's particularly exciting. Here is a 4-digit string starting with a 7. 7 and then a digit, a digit, a digit. Not longer, not shorter, but there you go. Now I'm going to show you a different way to do that same expression here when we look at the next set. But this is how you read these things. Square brackets, 0-9, there's your range, but I can add on a couple of other characters as part of the list, close my square brackets. Anything on a telephone keypad, 0 through 9 *#. Marvelous. Here's an example of parentheses. Like with iOS, a parenthesis indicates a grouping. In VCS, you don't have to put the backslash in front of the parentheses, as I just mentioned, but this allows me to capture a piece inside a longer string and then recall it later. And you would recall it with the group number. And here's an example of that. What if I've got bob.com and I also have billy.bob.com? And when people are sending things to me, they might be sending it to sales@bob.com, and they may also want to be sending it to sales@billy.bob.com. I want to get rid of the Billy. The actual address is sales@bob.com. So I create 3 groupings with the 3 different sets of expressions. And this is group 1, and this is group 2, and this is group 3. And I can recall components with the backslash. \1, go get this. Notice I include the ampersand here, or the @ sign, and then go get group 3. Gets rid of the Billy. And like with iOS expressions, the 1 and the 3, I don't want it to be an actual 1 and an actual 3. In order to change its meaning from a printable character into something with special meaning, right? Go get group 1, go get group 3, I do the backslashes there. There's an example of a replace string that would have backslashes in it. Any questions about the basic things here so far? Feel free to put them in Q&A. If I don't, I will go ahead and just keep going for now, but put them in if you need them. Okay, so those are our individual components. Now let's talk about some of the repetition expressions. And this is, again, one of those things people get really confused about. So let's take a look. A star. 0 or more repetitions. I have to have something in front of the star, usually a dot, but a dot star means it has to have at least 1 character, but it can really be anything you want. I don't really care. Including, actually, a dot star can be nothing, can match that too. It's not even just, I have to have something, I can have anything, which is different than a plus. A plus says that the previous expression must exist, right, at 1 or more, not 0 or more, but 1 or more of these. So it's a must exist expression. Question mark is a little different. Question mark is the previous expression may exist or can exist, but only 1 time. If I do dot star, right? I'm having a hard time with my little drawing tablet today. If I do dot star, right, that can be 0 characters, 1 characters, 20 characters, 100 characters. If I do dot plus, I have to have at least 1 character. I have to have at least 1 character, preferably 2. If I do, let's say, dot question mark, right, this means I have 0 or 1 repetition. 0 or 1 repetition. So that means I can have 1 character or I can have 2 characters, but it can't be any longer than that. Now, you wouldn't see this ever really. You would see these. The question marks used a little differently. And I'm going to be showing some examples in the next screen, just like I did before. But that's the difference between those 3 things. I can have nothing. I can have as many as I want as long as I have at least 1, or I can have exactly 0 or 1. Here's our curly Q brackets. We saw square brackets. That's a character. We saw parentheses. That's a grouping. Curly Q brackets allow me to give a variable an additional argument. And again, we're going to see an example on the next screen, but the example I give is if I do /D, that's 1 character. And I could do /d/d/d, that's 3 digits. Or I could say /d and then in curly Q brackets a 3, right? And that's saying this many of these. So that's 3 characters, 3 digits, I should say. But there's a way you can expand on the curly Q brackets, and that's to have a range. Matches between n and m repetitions. So n comma m here, what we're talking about here is like 1 through 3 or 4 through 6, this many of the previous. And examples, again, dot star, any length. Let's parse this one. First of all, I've got /+. So this is going to be the first character. Going to be the first character. Having a plus after it now. Now this is a programming character. This turns it into a printable character, so out plus. The plus says I have to have 1 or more of the previous. And then after that, I really don't care. So this would say, hey, it has to start with a plus. I have to have at least a plus, but I don't care really what follows that. This, though, also would match if I had ++ and then some numbers, because remember the plus is 1 or more of the previous expression. So this is a look back, right? And printable character has to be a plus. I need at least one of those. But if you need to check for E164 numbers where it has to start with a plus or I'm not going to accept it, this would be one of the ways that you could do that. Here's that same 4-digit expression we saw earlier with the /Ds, but now I'm doing it this way. This is the more elegant way of doing repeating previous characters. And you'll see that /D and then a number in the curly Q brackets quite a bit in VCS. Here's a range. /D curly Q brackets 4,6, add an IP address. If it is 4 or 5 or 6-digit numbers at that IP address, I will accept it. Think about caller IDs coming in from CUCM towards Expressway. Internally in CUCM, I may have 4 or 5 or 6-digit extensions. And by default, unless you tell it not to, Call Manager replaces the domain portion of a URI coming across from Call Manager into VCS with its own IP address for caller IDs. Yeah, we don't like that. We often change that. But this would be how I would capture that. And if I see this, then maybe I could have a transform inside Expressway that said, oh, well, if you do see this IP address, get rid of the IP address and instead put on a domain. There'd be additional characters to do that grouping and replacing, but that's how you could do something like that. Here are a couple of our question marks. I kind of blew through the question marks earlier, but let me talk about it now. So this first one, a 1 and then a question mark. Remember, the question mark is 0 or 1 of the previous characters, followed by 10 digits. So this is saying either a 10-digit number, think NANP, with or without the 1. And as before, what I could do also is I could have the 1 and then the question mark, and then I could put the grouping of D curly Q brackets 10 curly Q brackets, right? And then have my replace string be something like a /1, which is, hey, if it has 10 digits or 11 digits, just grab the 10 digits and move along. Search, replace. Here, I'm saying I have 7 digits preceded by a 703 or not. Now consider, as of last October, we no longer have 7-digit dialing on the PSTN. They've done away with it. You have to be sending 10 digits at least if you're floating around on the PSTN. But what if internally I still have some 7-digit stuff floating around. Well, if it's 7 digits, I have to assume an area code depending on exactly my situation. Well, this would allow me in a single expression to say, well, if I get 7 digits, I'm going to assume it's 703. But with the same expression, I can capture that same 7-digit string with the 703 in front of it as well, because maybe some of my contributors have started prefixing the 703 and others haven't. Again, single expression, allowing me to capture both things. Questions, issues about repetition expressions? Again, feel free to throw them into the Q&A. Okay. Now, here are some additional expressions. This is a quick list of some additional expressions you were likely to see in VCS and Expressway. It is by no means exhaustive. If you look at the REGEX manual for the expressways, there are a lot in there, and there are some really fun and funky kinds of things. Here's one, either or. I have two, I have a .com domain and I have a .net domain, and I want to be able to match both at the same time. Okay, well, then I can say that, I can have a, sales at, Sunset Learning dot, and I can match com or net at the, with a single expression. Hat and $sign. Just like in iOS, explains a beginning and an end of an expression, allows me to be very, very specific about the length of an expression. And as an example, let's suppose I do a grouping of 7 ... Okay, so that's a 4-digit string starting with a 7. That could be in the middle of a digit string. I could have, 4276394 I don't know, whatever. And what do you know? These 4 digits here would be referenced by this. And I don't want that. I only want it if it's maybe exactly 4 digits starting with a 7. So what I can do, and again, this is just the same as in iOS, I can say hat 7 ... $sign. And now what I'm saying is exactly 4 digits, exactly starting with a 7. It has to be, the 7 has to be the first character, and the ... and that's all the longer. I could also do something like hat 7 ... Now I'm not describing the end of the string. So as long as it's at least 4 digits and it starts with a 7, it could be longer. So there's different ways to use these. If you write voice translation rules at all, you'll probably use them quite a bit, but it's also can be used in Expressway. And I'm using numbers because I'm kind of used to them, but do know that you can, those can be characters too. They can be alpha characters. They don't have to be just digits. You see this more in web pages than you see in like iOS or in Expressways, but the _s, the single white space character, right, is what's the word I'm looking for? It's just a programming thing. And so you might see this. It's an example of one of those things we don't generally see in VCS, because generally URIs don't have spaces in them, but they might. Maybe I'm looking at a string, the name portion of caller ID instead of the actual URI, and I want to look for a space. I can certainly do that. Local domains. In VCS Expressway, you can declare the domains that are internal domains that are to be processed by VCS. You can set up a search string that allows me to capture anything that's one of my local domains. And it will go look through the list, and any of those that match, great. Or I can also say, as long as it's not one of my local domains, right? Think business to business calling. This allows me with a single expression to capture a lot of different kinds of traffic without having to manually, every time I change a domain, maybe I'm hosting or something, every time I change a domain, I have to change my expressions. This just gets all local domains. And similarly, the %sign and IPv4 %sign allows me to capture all IPv4 addresses. You could also write this as %IP %, and that would be all IPv4 and all IPv6 addresses. There's a whole list of different ways that you can capture these things. But just, again, there is more. This is just some. Now, as an example, don't do this, by the way. I'm showing you this just so we can practice parsing the expressions, but don't do this in a production environment. Don't. There's lots of reasons why not, and there's easier ways to do it, but I want to use this as an example of how we can parse. All right. So I've got brackets. Remember, brackets are a thing, and those brackets, actually, let me change colors here. Brackets are a thing. I'm saying a character. And then I've got this programming character here saying one or more of the previous. That means inside this brackets is going to be a character, A through Z, 0 through 9, dot, underscore, dash. And I have to have at least one thing there, but it can be longer. And then I've got a printable character, an at. And then like before, I've got my brackets and the plus saying I have to have at least something here. My next piece is the backslash dot. That means I have to have a dot here, not a variable, but a dot. And then here's my ors. Gee, something at something dot one of these. That sounds like a URI or an email address, doesn't it? And that's exactly what this kind of expression could do. This would allow me to capture anything that is properly formatted as a URI or an email address. Now, this will allow me to limit what kinds of characters I'm willing to accept in the user portion of the email or URI, and would limit which TLDs I'm accepting. So in this way, I can control what can and cannot be entered as an email address or a URI in my system. But again, this particular expression, there are actually some machine language reasons you don't want to do this. But from a parsing standpoint, I thought it was a really, really cool example. The takeaway I want you to take away from this, right? If you're ever looking at a really complex expression, start looking for things like groupings, start looking for things like your brackets. Because remember, your brackets, this is going to be a character, right? One character. All right, well, once I'm done with my one character, what's the next thing I see? Do I see a variable? Do I see a specific item? This is a variable, and that variable relates to the previous expression. And then I have my at. I have to have an at there. It has no other meaning, printable character. And again, look for brackets, look for groupings, because this is going to relate to either the variable after it, or in the case of something like, this, the variable before it. Just depends on the syntax. Here's my printable character again, and then again in brackets. This is how you can dig into these expressions and try to figure out what they mean. Here's another way of saying a 10-digit number that's in the 703 area code, but it has to be exactly 10 digits, can't be any longer, can't be any shorter. Okay, I happen to be in the 703 area code, which is why I use it as an example, but there you go. And now, these are the ones that drive people crazy. These are called lookaheads and lookbehinds. When you see these expressions, you are capturing a set of data, and that set of data is either going to be like an ends with or a doesn't end with, or ends with but nothing else, or ends with and nothing before. There's when you're doing like HTML coding, this has a huge impact, and HTML coders will totally know exactly what to do with these. I find them kind of confusing, like everybody else does, when you're looking at expressions in VCS. Here are two, though, that you will see in VCS, and these two, interestingly, are equivalent as far as the expressways are concerned. Let's take a look at what it's saying. Question mark, exclamation point, and then anything. Negative look ahead. What that's saying is there shouldn't be anything in front of this, right? I am looking from here all the way through the point where it ends right there at that. So there shouldn't be anything in front of the domain. I'm sorry, other than the user portion, but there shouldn't be anything in front of the user portion in this URI. And as long as I have just a user portion at sli-uclabs.com, and that ends there, I'm good to go. The .star at the end, keeping in mind that there is stuff, if you think about like an invite, a SIP invite message, after you see the URI, you're going to have :5060 or blah, 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 tags and all sorts of other branches, all sorts of other things. So this allows for other things to be after that. But as far as the URI portion is concerned, it is user portion at sli-uclabs.com and whatever. This is a different way of expressing the same idea. This is saying I might have, stuff in front, right? Like invite : or invite SIP : but negative look behind, meaning I'm not worrying about what's out here. sli-uclabs.com, and again, ends with $. In both cases, what I'm looking for are URIs in this exact domain. And because I've got the negative, right, the exclamation point in there, not. Example, my VCS domain supports the routing of calls back and forth between call manager and the VCS, the expressways, sli-uclabs.com. Cool. Anything else that's not that domain would be a business-to-business call. So I might have one search string which captures anything at sli-uclabs.com and processes it. That's either local or that's going to go to call manager. Cool. Anything else is a business-to-business call, my Expressway C says to itself, and should be sent over to the Expressway E for business-to-business routing. Well, how do I include everything except local? This is one of those ways. And because of the ways these two are constructed, these are seen equivalently. And here's a way of doing that if I have multiple domains. Here again, I'm doing a negative look ahead, so not any kind of local domain. This is just like this, but instead of one domain, it's many domains. So match all non-local domains. Rather than having multiple expressions for my different domains internally, this would capture everything not a local domain. And I might have another one without the exclamation point, right? And that would capture, all local domains, process it this way, all non-local domains, process it that way. With these two things, I can do a lot of call routing all at once. Okay, last piece of this. Now that we've seen how to do some matching stuff, what about the replacing pieces? How do I see replacements? /D star. Remember, the star is numbers. This is saying if I receive digits, then it matches. Replace that with, and notice I've got my parentheses here for a grouping, replace this with, take that grouping, put it here, and then add a domain. This allows me to add a domain to a received number. If you have, let's say, H323 endpoints in your VCS Expressway, they don't send URIs, they just send digits. Well, when they do, I need to make sure I tack on a domain because I'm doing domain-based call routing inside my Expressway. There you go. But gee, if I'm sending stuff off to a H323 endpoint, I need to make sure I remove the domain first. So here I've got, hey, I don't really care what's here, but if there is a domain name associated with it, I want you to get rid of it. Group 1, anything that follows, get rid of it. Removes a domain. This might be not necessarily a transform, but this might be a search rule. Dot plus have to have something up here at SLI-UC Labs, and again, /.com. There's my grouping. I'm grouping the entire thing because I'm not trying to change it, but that would be a leave. Actually, I probably wouldn't have the parentheses around it, but this would be a leave statement, right? This is just a match. So this would be a search rule expression rather than a transform expression. Let's parse this. Okay, so first I've got a group 1. And notice that I have a question mark saying I either have to have this or not, but I can't have more, I can't have less, and I can't have different. So pod 5 dot, I can have it or not have it. There's going to be something in front of the at, and then I also have to have this. This would match either pod5.sli.uclabs.com, or because the question mark says I don't have to have this, just sli.uclabs.com. So either one of those. This allows me with a single expression to capture 2 domains. And these two, very similar. I don't have the question mark in here. What I'm doing with both of these is taking the pod5.sli.uclabs.com and getting rid of the pod5. Notice I've got the replace string as /1/3. So go get this and go get this. But notice the closed parentheses. The closed parentheses, right, are after the dot star. Here, the closed parentheses are before the dot star. These are the subtle differences. This is just a moving a parenthesis 2 characters to the left. And now I change the meaning. Group 3, does group 3 include what follows after COM? So again, like a port number or something like that. Or does it exclude it? Do I want to get rid of it? Look for those subtle differences when you're parsing these things, because that, again, changes the meaning. And these are the kinds of things, when I do the troubleshooting one, I'm going to be testing these 2 things to show how they do, if you're using these as a transform, they do tend to change. Not tend to change, they will change. Okay. Questions, because that's actually kind of it. Any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, or I don't know, I'm not sure if you guys can unmute yourselves or not, but there we go. If there aren't any, I hope this has been useful. Thank you very much for coming. If you need more information about classes at Sunset Learning, or I want to reach out, you have a question about this webinar, info@sunsetlearning.com, and they will get you to me. So thanks for attending, and I hope I see you in class one day.